Good morning and welcome to the annual seminar of ValueBioMat Strategic Research Council project. My name is Jukka Seppälä. I have pleasure to introduce this seminar and start the seminar of today. You are welcome here in Aalto University, School of Chemical Engineering, Lecture Hall 1, and also the audience by the computers. We are streaming this event also to wider audience. The title of this event is Circularity of Plastics, Fostering Sustainability Through Multidisciplinary Collaboration. First, maybe before I introduce ValueBioMat, I can show quickly today's program. We have three speeches today by top experts in the field of plastics industry, circularity, and also regulatory aspects of sustainability and circularity. Jari Lehtinen from Borealis, Inka Orko from VTT, and Professor Elizabeth Kirk from University of Lincoln, in Great Britain. We also have some discussions in the context and connection to these presentations. We also have possibility of the audience to take part in having like questions and comments online to this event, and we will discuss of presented questions. So let us have this as like discussive, informal, and creative, and how to say, let us approach the topic from different angles. That is the idea of the event, and that is the idea of the whole ValueBioMat project. You can see what ValueBioMat is going to our web pages, valuebiomat.fi. And there you can also have a look if you have interest, or have a look on the other Strategic Research Council programs that are ongoing. Close to us, there is Biocolor and Phoenix in addition to ValueBioMat, but it is other kinds and quite a great number of interesting projects in addition. We are a consortium having multiple years funding and activity. We started 2019 and will continue until 2025. Right now we are about in the middle of this approach. So it's been quite an exciting and interesting journey to learn to know other disciplines, to learn to know the top experts in various groups. We are altogether 6 working packages. We wind together expertise in chemistry, polymer chemistry, polymer science, together with advanced processing techniques like additive manufacturing. We, in addition, and essentially have knowledge of raw materials, opportunities, bio-based feedstocks with under conduction of Hannu Ilvesniemi and Natural Reserve Center of Finland, Luke. Essentially, we have knowledge and interest to investigate incentives and business models towards sustainability, circularity, and bio-based options for the future. Jan Holmström and also VTT take care of this activity in this consortium. As we know, society society has also interest to regulate things. It's incentives, business opportunities, but at the same time, society needs certain regulation. Also, it needs, and it is important to have like labeling of the subject and around the subject, and there working package number 5 under conduction of Rosa Balladini is contributing in a very great way. We have in very big role also communication and how to say coordination, so that we are a group, we interact within this project and also with our committed advisory board members, and there Katri Valkokaris and Kasper Diener's role is very central. It is a challenge, of course, to speak the same language, but at the same time, like today, it's a great opportunity to contribute and look from different angles to the same joint opportunity and build the future towards more sustainable solutions. That's, of course, and we all understand the great motivation of this project. We know maybe the same that I already said is illustrated here on this slide. We know that there are great transitions taking place in the society. It's transition from fossil to something that is non-fossil, transition from CO2 releasing to carbon neutral or even CO2 binding technologies. It's transition towards bio-based solutions, and it is very dramatic transition already taking place to electrify materials productions, chemical industries, and the whole society with sustainable renewable forms of energy. Wind power and solar power are already today feasible, and they will grow very dramatically. This will enable hydrogen economy, and this will enable then CO2 capturing techniques in a completely new way for the future of materials production. Let us discuss about those today. I'm keen to hear experts' opinions on this. Here you can see our committed industrial advisory board members. It's not only companies, but it's also public actors and government bodies that have expressed interest to communicate with us. We welcome also additional advisory board members if there is interest to join. With these words, once again, welcome to this seminar. Let's make it a lively event, a creative event with this program. And with these words, I hand over to Bas van Bochove, who is committed to chair the first part of this seminar. Bas, please.
Yes, thank you, Jukka. Also from my part, welcome everybody. We'll soon go to the first speaker, but before we go there, let me say this in the hall, everybody. This link here on my left, you can use those to send in your questions, and then Kasper will select some of those questions to have in the discussion afterwards. And I think, Kasper, you have put the link also in the Zoom for the remote, those that join us remotely. So then let me introduce our first speaker. That is Jari Lehtinen from Borealis. He is at the moment a process owner at Borealis and previously held various positions in operations, business, and research and development. And he is here to talk about Spirit, if I'm correct. So Jari, if I may give you the word.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure that was functioning very well, so should I use actually this one? Did you all hear Jukka very well back there? So
So I don't need this. Yeah, now you're here, I guess. But I'm not sure if I don't use this one that you hear me well. But okay, I keep this to be sure. It's easy, still to be the habit to sit in the back row. So. Interesting. Very good. So good morning also from my behalf. Indeed, my name is Jari Lehtinen. Have been working in Borealis a long time in the industry. And as mentioned, various areas, but now actually very recently studied as a program manager. And I'm going to talk about the program which we are now kicking off at the moment. And you see the program name here, that's called SPIRIT. And SPIRIT is coming from the words Sustainable Plastics Industry Transformation. So it's a specific program. I come a little bit also, there is some funding and that kind of topics behind, and that's also a bit invitation to you all actually to join it. Good, I have a clicker here. There is this black label on here, but I guess it's not bothering you as much as it was bothering me first, but okay. From the streaming point of view, does it make a difference if I'm here or there? No, good. Then I'm rather here, closer to you. Good. First slide, a little bit about plastics actually, and what I call is there is a plastics dilemma at the moment. Let me talk first about the good side or the other side of the coin. You all know, of course, plastics, and it's actually quite difficult to even imagine life without plastics nowadays. But we all know the debate at the moment, and I'm at least getting some of my friends coming basically saying, you produce plastics, that's bad. Should we ban actually? Should we stop producing plastics? And fair enough. It's a fair question. But if you think or imagine really life without plastics today, it's actually quite difficult. And many topics, Jukka mentioned already electrification. You can make windmill parks, but how are you going to transport the electrons if you don't have cables, for example, with insulation layers from plastics and so on. So actually plastics are saving a lot of resources. If you think electrification, if you think food waste, packaging, if you think supplying clear and clean, safe water, or all that kind of things, or transportation, lightweighting actually vehicles and so on. They save a lot of resources. But then at the same time, we have a huge challenge, of course, with plastics. And basically we have the three key challenges we need to solve. One is, of course, that it's still mostly, and like in our case in Borealis, you could say more or less 100% is based on fossil raw materials. So we bring all the time more carbon into the system. Not good. Second thing, plastics recycling is at a low level. Especially in Finland, it's actually very low level. We don't put that much into landfilling in Finland. I think we have about the lowest rate in Europe on landfilling, but at the same time, our recycling rate is about the lowest in Europe as well. How is that possible? That's possible because we basically use it as an energy source, and it's used in incineration mainly. And incineration means what? CO2 emissions, right? 1 kilo plastics, 3 kilo CO2 incinerated. And then thirdly, CO2 emissions from the production as well, on top of that incineration. It's about 2 kilo CO2 emissions when we produce 1 kilo plastic. If you incinerate, it's another 3 kilos, so you get about 5 kilo if you produce and incinerate 1 kilo plastics. And in our case, it's mainly actually the raw materials of polyethylene and polypropylene, which is the cracking process where you basically produce ethylene and propylene, and we have cracking furnaces. That's where we basically produce all the emissions. Good. This is how we would like to see actually the former value chain turning into value circle. And that basically I can also use to explain the scope of this program. But this is of course how it should look like in the future, and hopefully in the quite near future. Thanks. So we need to of course replace the fossil raw materials. That's one thing. It's quite a big thing. If you think our scale, for example, the operations we have in Finland, in Porvoo, the cracker we are having, it's about, it's over 1 million ton, 1.2 million ton per annum. That kind of volumes we are talking in one site, basically. Then we need to, of course, have this circular economy in plastics. So really have a step up increase on the recycling, and that basically can lead either mechanical, chemical recycling. And we need to, of course, go to carbon neutral production. You see a couple of figures there, what we have put as a target as Borealis in Finland. So we would like to have 2030, 1/3 of the feedstock, either renewable or recyclable. And that means from that 1.2, 400 kilotons. That kind of volume pretty soon. And production to be carbon neutral latest by 2045. That's the same target as the Finnish chemical industry has as a whole. And now we are forming the Spirit program, kicking it off at the moment, and that's what we want to use really to boost this and build an ecosystem around this one. Jukka was also mentioning these ecosystems, and I think that's really vital, of course, to run this kind of transformations. You see the same circle here, and I use this now to explain also briefly what is the program about. It has 4, you could say, technical work packages, 1, 2, 3, 4. The first one is focusing on the feedstock. And as I said, in Finland, over 1 million ton, which we need to replace. And of course, we have the renewables possibility. And then also, I would say longer term, as already also mentioned by Jukka, this, of course, this CCU, so carbon capture and utilization is something we are of course, looking and working already now. But I think really it's coming a bit later in that kind of scales. The second work package is focusing on the recycling part. As mentioned, we are pretty low in Finland, and it has to clearly go up. Of course, I mean, levels like 25%, 30% is definitely not good enough. Mechanical, chemical recycling, both there. Third one is focusing on our own CO2 emissions. But also, as I mentioned, it's very much coming from the cracker and the cracker furnaces, where we actually have a fuel gas, methane, being as a firing gas, and that's we equaling about in Porvoo operations to 500,000 tons of CO2 emissions, which makes Borealis actually today as number 7 in the emission trading list, and that of course is a list you would not like to be. And then we have a fourth one, which is actually a bit more diverse and complex, but that's the work in the marketplace, what we call enablers for that green transition. And there you come to topics like what kind of products we are going to produce in the future. What kind of plastic articles, what is plastic packaging in the future so that it can be also recycled easier, or it can contain recycled content. And how can we secure the same excellent properties as plastic has today? How do we do all the waste collection sorting systems that we could have good quality of plastic waste coming back as raw material? Big issues there actually to work as enablers. Okay, sorry, I'm out of the screen, sorry. That's what I asked, if it makes a difference, so it made. Yeah, okay, good, thanks. I just didn't want to stand in front of the screen, so that's okay, good. I actually more or less jump over this. Let's come in the discussion, so I don't spend too much time now. I can just flip them basically. These are the 4 work packages. I mentioned them briefly, but you can, I think, already imagine what are we talking about. And perhaps you could have even proposals, what should we look into? Of course, being in Finland, being in Nordic countries, forest industry is definitely an area where we could look for renewable raw materials. And secondly, I would like to highlight that we need to be very careful also on that, of course. Going from fossil into renewable is not that straightforward. I mean, there is the technological issue, but there is also the issue of sustainability there. We don't want to go, for example, to the food chain. So it has to be a feedstock which is sustainable as well. So we are looking very much on side streams or waste streams of today's, for example, forest industry or agriculture and so on, where we need to find them. Second one, as mentioned, there are basically two technologies very much: mechanical recycling, chemical recycling now emerging more and more, quite new, not really mature technology yet, but it's there. And I think both of them need still quite some development actually also in the technology so that we can secure good quality of feedstock. There are of course two key differences if you think mechanical and chemical recycling. Mechanical will always be more efficient, cheaper, and more sustainable from environment point of view. But it has quite limitations, what kind of plastic waste you can take into it. And then also, even if you can take, where can you use that in an application? Today, for example, in the food contact applications, it's not accepted, except one exception. In Finland, these are these plastic PET bottles, which we all know from a long time. So there is a lot of development in that area. Chemical recycling is, of course, that way theoretically good because it can take theoretically lower quality material. And if you then produce, you go back to molecules and you polymerize it, repolymerize it, you have virgin material. So you can use it in any application. But it's quite energy intensive technology. So it's from that point of view, not very good technology yet, at least. Carbon neutral production. As said, our main focus here is the cracking furnaces. So that's looking, of course, that kind of topics around the furnace technology and so on. Electrification is definitely one area. If you go to electrified furnaces, another clear one with what we are looking is, of course, using instead of methane or natural gas, you could use hydrogen firing, for example. But also, actually, we are looking, do we need all these furnaces? Because if we have renewable feedstock, could we actually get such a feedstock that we can bypass the furnaces and we don't need to crack at all? Produce, for example, via alcohol route directly ethylene, going from ethanol to ethylene as an example. And electrification, of course, is an issue also from the electricity point of view. It has to be green and it needs to be enough and so on. So that's also something. And then the fourth one, indeed, as I mentioned, very, very complex area, so to say, a lot of things around here where we need really a big ecosystem working around these areas that how can we get actually promoted with this circular or recycling or and especially material to material. One of the problems today is that the amount of plastic which is recycled in Finland, for example, is not really going to the same application anymore. It tends to go to lower value application. If you go to big scale, that doesn't function. I mean, we cannot not take all the plastic and produce only low value products. Maybe we need to get also the quality up. Good. So those are the four areas. There are also some, let's say, cross-cutting topics, of course, looking the business models that will be different, of course. Analytical methods are needed, for example, for the renewable feedstock and so on. Digitalization is definitely an area which we could combine and take advantage from there and so on. Few words about this one as well, because I want to use this a bit like an invitation to you all as well. We also talk here about funding, and the Spirit program is actually funded by Business Finland. You see it there on the top. It's coming from European Union, RRF, so this Recovery and Resilience Facilities funding. And in Finland, actually, there is, in Business Finland, quite a big competition, what they call challenge competition for leading companies. So they invite companies to solve global challenges. And in this case, it's of course the plastics sustainability. And we took part of that last summer, last autumn, and got further into the final. And then now February, we got decision from Business Finland that we were accepted as what they call Veturi, which is a locomotive company. And this has two issues from funding point of view. First of all, it's good news for Borealis as such. We have said that we will invest 50 million euro more for R&D in 4 years. And by doing that, we have a decision that Business Finland, if we then fulfill all the requirements, can fund 40% of that, up to 20 million euro. That's the maximum funding you can get. And then on top of that, for the ecosystem we are going to build around, they reserve another 50 million euro. So altogether, there is 50 plus 20, 70 million euro funding available. So what we can do now is build ecosystem together with different companies, research institutes, authorities, and so on, and make parallel partnership projects, which are supporting this roadmap, what I was talking. Is it then renewable feedstock? Is it then recycling? Is it then designing or reuse concepts and so on? All different kind of things. And then one by one, those partnership projects can apply also funding from Business Finland. We started now in February only, and in the first round now in April, we had 4 applications actually going there. But there is 3 times a year call for that. So then next one is in the autumn, end of September. And then in the winter and next spring again and so on. It's a 4-year program. It's R&D and I, so research, development, innovation. So it can go up to certain technical readiness level. It's not for commercialization investments and so on, but really for looking for new ways of producing something, new technologies. Demonstration units can be invested and so on, but not commercialization. I don't go into this one, and I think you know basically Business Finland rules, but there are different type of projects. It can be bigger consortiums, co-innovation projects, or co-research projects with different research institutes, or company projects with one company. And there are different percentages for the funding depending the type of the organization and so on. It's quite normal system. Couple of examples. I think I have still 5 minutes, right? Good. Or let's say a couple of issues around these. I thought this might be interesting in a way for the discussion after the presentation. So if you look in a way this kind of circle today, there are quite many topics we can work actually, starting from all of us as consumers. How do we behave when we go and buy something in the grocery shop? Do we think about it in a way? Is this package recyclable when I buy? So it's about mindset as well, and we see this of course turning, but normally this actually is the quickest way to change something if the market and the customers and the consumers change their behavior. Design for recycling, I cannot emphasize that too much. That's also interesting when you look today, if you buy something, you have the package. You want a certain product, but you get the package normally with it. And if you look at it in a way, how easy that is to recycle. And there are quite differences if you go to grocery shop and buy food, for example, in a food package. Quite differences in that way. And I think that's we need to work really thoroughly actually, that you can easily recycle, but on the other hand also design it so that you can use the recycled material in it. So it's both parts of it. Of course, reuse concepts would be excellent. I think these single-use plastics, that's the focus area where we need to really reduce drastically. Because on the other hand, if you think many applications, cables, pipes I mentioned, they are extremely good carbon sink. I mean, you make a plastic pipe, it can be there 50 years, 100 years. It's very good carbon sink. But of course, single-use plastic today, you buy something, you throw it away, and worst case, it's in the ocean. At the end, that's definitely not good. Separate collections. I don't know how many of you are doing separate or let's say sorting at home. I hope everybody already. I think at least in Helsinki area, it's better available normally than perhaps in a smaller towns like Porvoo. But you can do it. It's still a bit funny. I try to motivate at home that earlier we put everything on one bag. You put it in the trash bin. It was collected. Very easy for my family. Now we try to sort everything. We have different boxes where we put them, and I pay more for it. That's what I don't get it in a way on it. That somehow it's not really driving into that change because you even pay more for it, but that's how it is at the moment. Good. Mechanical and chemical recycling, I already mentioned. We should try to really do as much as possible via the mechanical. So I don't want to say and see that we kind of say that, okay, we don't need to have mechanical recycling, chemical recycling will solve it. It will not be so efficient. It's clear. So we need to work on both. So the order is definitely reuse. That's the best option. And then basically mechanical, chemical, and after that comes the CO2, CCU capturing. This might change, of course, long term, this picture. So I don't know, 2050, 2060, 2070, it might be a different picture, but for the next couple of decades, this is the order. And then, of course, a lot of standardization, regulation. I personally prefer to have both carrot and stick, so that there is also something coming from the regulation saying that you have to recycle. Or if the packaging is not recyclable, you need to either pay fines or even it's banned. There are this kind of things coming actually. Good. Perhaps just this one also quickly that way, that I think you need to kind of design and optimize actually which one you will use. So depending a bit in a way, what kind of raw material you have. Is it mixed waste or separately collected? And then, as I said, in a way, this is going by the mechanical recycling is much more efficient. But sometimes you may have to do this because this is not anymore possible with the raw material quality or the final application. If you think food contact, I think we can do there something with mechanical recycling with closed loop, like we have PET bottles. But there might be some applications, like in healthcare. Are we going to ever accept infusion pouch, for example, from mechanically recycled material? That kind of things there might be. Bit showing in a way that there are, of course, many steps. If you think in a way that you, for example, sort something, you get the waste and you are sorting it, and there are many steps today that you recover different materials, plastics, but also other materials what you have in the mixed waste. Then you have the plastics, then you sort the plastics to different type of plastics and so on. Washing, shredding, then they're basically melting and producing it. And there is waste normally in every step. And this might be the reason why we really have to have the chemical recycling beside, but we should try to minimize basically that part. And then the other part. So then you produce, for example, a package. You produce film and you have printing, make the package, you're packing, and then we get it as an end user, consumer, and then we put it into mixed waste often. So here, of course, if you can do shortcuts, you can definitely improve a lot the quality and efficiency. And if you can do even more, let's say, like I said, closed loop type of things, getting it there. Or of course, during the production and so on. So these are things where we can improve a lot still. And then finally, the last slide is, let's say, coming back to this design. So we have, for example, tried to promote with this kind of codes of conduct. What should you consider when you design a package? But might be also good for all of us to keep in mind when we go next time to the shop and buy something. There is quite a difference with the product to another product, how it can be recycled. Just to give you one example, if you buy this evening, let's say, food which is packed into a plastic package, you have normally then the film on it. And then unfortunately, very often you have a sticker on it. The film already can have, many different materials, sometimes, 10 layers or up to 12 layers, different materials. And when you put the sticker on it with cellulosic fibers, it's a nightmare for the recycler. I think you can agree on that it's more or less impossible to recycle anymore. And you can find already packages where you have a cardboard around it and you can nicely remove it separately and then put the plastic film separately. So and it's not that difficult. It's just if you think about it. So there it is. Good. So these are the 4 areas. There are some names. There is a leader for each area. I'm leading now the whole program, so you can anytime take contact with me if you have something where you would like to join any of these areas where you could contribute. But you see also there is leaders, Antti Ilves, Jaakko Tuomainen, Mikko Rönkä, Auli Nummila Pakarinen for that each specific work package, but I'm dealing with all of them and the ecosystem leadership and so on, so you can contact me. Good. So join the good spirit. That's basically about it. I stole your mind.
That's okay. This one should work. Does this? No. Yes, it doesn't. Or maybe now. Back for a second.
Yeah, so thank you very much. Now we go into the ValueBioMat discussion, and Jukka will join us for that session. Reminder for everybody here in the lecture hall, you can use the link on my left, on your right, to send in your questions. They will end up with Casper and also the people online. That link is in the chat, and hopefully you have lots of questions. Let me give you some time and start here with Jukka once his microphone is working. Or I'll just hand the microphone here. Jukka, we saw in one of the first slides, Jari mentioned the plastics dilemma, and you wrote a editorial called "The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly," and so I think it's basically meant the same, right? We have a very good side. We also have a very bad side. Do you think that the things that Borealis is researching in Spirit, do they contribute to get the bad and ugly to the good side?
Yes, that's right. I was asked to write one short text for one journal, so I borrowed this title from the well-known Western. Hyvät, pahat ja rumat in Finnish. That at that time I think was nicely also reflecting the discussion around plastics, and I think what Jari you mentioned it is about the same, like how to say, problemacy. It is our joint, how to say, joint agenda to find good solutions. Inevitably, we have these problems, but at the same time, there are good reasons to use these materials. The good sides are there. Technologies and applications are very fine-tuned. Think about advanced like applications of any material, including plastics, cars, airplanes, anything, electronics. It's very, very big development work for every detail and all the materials. And that's why in certain cases and so widely plastics are used. But what you, Jari, you said that we in this time and looking for the future, we have to prioritize certain properties and weight certain features more than before. And it is about this sustainability aspects. And one detail, important thing is what you also focused is to prioritize circularity of any product and the materials as one of the key property of the material in design and in also in regarding chemical compositions. Maybe that was not earlier so prioritized property, and that we should like highlight more than before. As one of the, there are so many like details that you mentioned, and but very much I agree. Was what you asked.
Yeah, maybe this is now working. It's great, and maybe I can, if you pass on the microphone, because you now also mentioned and you had it about this designing materials for recycling. And I'm wondering, how can we sort of, because you would be the producer, but then there's the customer in the first place who then makes, for example, the packaging, and then there's the customer in the supermarket, for example, buying their food. But how can you as Borealis make sure, you mentioned the code of conduct, but can you really enforce that when one of your customers buys it for you and then goes on and designing their packaging?
That is, of course, the challenge. That's also why we have the program. But like I said, it's many aspects on that, or let's say many parameters on that. And I think we all need to work on that around the value chain, basically. Regulation is definitely one thing. There is, of course, coming this kind of, let's say, regulation strongly. If I now take from top of my head, I think European Union is talking about target 50% of packaging recycled already 2025, which is only a few years away from here. I think in UK they have started this year, was it April now, already fines, so that if your packaging is not recyclable, you need to pay £200 of fines per ton. That's quite a lot, actually. So there are these kind of things coming, which of course partly forces. But like I said, still in my mind, and I think in Western countries like in Finland, the consumer, do we call it consumer education, but at least awareness is normally the quickest. If you simply don't buy anymore that package, which is not recyclable, it's not going to be produced a long time, for sure. So there are, of course, many things. Unfortunately, a bit coming back what Jukka said, of course, it's now pity thinking now that, we have developed now decades very technically advanced products, but not considering the recycling because it was not an issue. And now we need to go back. And then one thing is, for example, going from multi-materials to monomaterials. But like I said, this film on top of the food package which you are buying, it's extremely developed. You know, there are barrier layers and sealing layers, and there are this and that. Now to make the same properties, I mean, you want to keep, of course, the food in a good quality. And that's quite nice. You buy a food package and you can keep it in your refrigerator for 1 week. And that's thanks to this excellent packaging. But let's say changing that now to monomaterial, that's a big development. We need to look what that could mean. So there, we need to work on all those fronts. But like I said, when the consumers change their thinking and behavior, that's a really big driver. So I hope that actually happens, and I believe in Finland that can happen.
Jukka wanted to say something, yeah.
Yeah. What I want to point is that we have, however, very good examples here in Finland and in some other Nordic countries about the deposit systems, well-functioning recycling of bottom materials. It could be widened, to my mind. So and it's an example of like positive incentive. People have the willingness if the infra is there and some small incentive.
Yep. So is that because that's actually a question from someone from the audience? So is this incentive the answer? If Finland has such a low plastics recycling percentage, what is it that other countries do better than Finland?
I mean, it's of course partly regulationary things. Of course, we are also, in Finland, we have some challenges as we have not that high population in a relatively large country. So collecting, for example, in Finland is sometimes seen. It is easier in towns, like it's easier in Helsinki, greater Helsinki area than it is in the countryside, definitely. And that's perhaps the reason why I'm paying more for this collection system now, because you need another car driving around, the streets and so on. There are, of course, many that kind of things. On the other hand, we have also chosen in Finland that we use it for energy purposes. And of course, as long as you, for example, still burn coal in some energy making like Helsinki has been doing, I think it's still you could say okay that moment, burning plastic as well, but we need to get away from the fossil, of course, and that we cannot afford anymore. So
does the consumer know enough about this? If I ask around in my family who are not polymer chemists at all, and I say like, so have you figured out what kind of plastic it is, and if it's recycled, they go like, it's plastic.
Yeah, that is also, and this is one thing and there is a bit debate and different opinions. Should we go for sorting more, or should we actually develop the sorting machines and, you just put mixed waste and then you sort with sorting, because they are developing a lot. And of course, bit what Jukka, you said about this deposit system, I believe also that that's the kind of future, but you need to make it also clever, and their digitalization could help basically that already what you do today, if you sort your plastic, if it's cleverly marked, you could in the sorting use it, because sometimes we have a challenge to recognize actually what plastic it is, and if you have multi-materials and so on. So if you develop that system, you could perhaps keep it so that you put all the plastic in one place, but then you have a good system that you can basically recover more or less all of that. So.
Yeah, but you asked, do we know enough? Do the consumers know enough? They have interest to know what is good, what is bad, what is ugly, for sure. But is there knowledge enough? Not only by consumers, but also by the decision makers, industry, and all the society. I've been involved in, some European advisory mechanisms of academic societies. Big projects where top experts met to make suggestions for the European Union level decision making on certain things like plastics ending to the nature, etc., kind of things, how to solve those. It was interesting. We badly need more science-based knowledge. And for example, one of the key outcomes in those discussions was that there is not a single silver bullet to solve the problem. We need to implement all the measures in parallel. Biodegradation is not the silver bullet. It can be in some cases a good thing, but marine scientists were quite reserved regarding widely expanding biodegradation as a solution. So it depends. But what I want to say is that what we need in the society badly and much more is science-based knowledge about, for example, like life cycle effects of materials and products, so that what we choose, what we do, it should be facts-based. And then eyes may open to what is good, what is bad, and what is ugly.
Yes, in view of the time, because that clock is a little bit behind, the clock is a couple minutes. So let me ask one more audience question that we had. And to Jari, can in a different type of recycling, the chemical recycling, can in Finland alone the volumes of recyclable material for chemical recycling reach critical enough values for it to be cost efficient?
It is actually, we see in some technologies, we talk about gasification and methanol routes and so on. We know that we need big units, and we have typically big units. Like I said, we have 1 million ton, over 1 million ton feed for the cracker. But what we also know that today we have had one feedstock, very constant. That will not be the future anymore. There will be smaller flows, and typically, for example, these chemical recycling units today, they are from 10 kilotons to 30 kilotons per annum. So if you think 10 kilotons, we need 100 of them to make 1 million tons. So we know that so in that scale, and on the other hand, you don't want to transport the waste too much. So there is emerging, there are already some companies building that capacity. So, and our neighbor Neste is talking as a target to 2030 to already have 1 million ton of recycled plastic oil or whatever they call it. So chemically recycled feedstock. So that is available. I would say there is not limitation from that point of view.
No. Okay, great. Let's give a hand to both Jukka and Jari for the nice discussion. And if you want to listen to more about this topic, yesterday I sat down with Jukka and we recorded an episode for our podcast that ValueBioMat is producing. So somewhere next week in your feed, an episode with Jukka about this very topic. And in the meantime, you can of course go there and listen to the previous episodes that are already uploaded. Right, then we go to the next speaker. And the next speaker is Inka Orko. She is a co-creation manager at VTT. With a mission to set up and facilitate an innovative ecosystem in circular economy and circular design. Inka has extensive experience in working as business developer in practical circular economy concept development cases, as well as leading a research team in sustainability assessment. She is joining us online. I see that the presentation is now put into the, there we go. So we have the presentation. Do we also have sound here in the lecture hall, Casper?
Good morning, everyone. This is Inka talking. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm so sorry I won't be able to be there in person, but let's see how we do with this. So good to be here, and good morning on my behalf as well. And I heard several times my keywords, an ecosystem, in Jari's presentation, so I think it's a good place to move forward now. So let's talk about ecosystems, let's talk about plastics, and then let's talk about plastic ecosystem this morning. Does anyone in the audience know, by the way, how long at an average it takes for an F1 pit stop? I'm not an expert in Formula Ones at all, but I've been told that it takes about 2.8 seconds. I won't be able to see whether you knew that already, but that's pretty amazing, isn't it? And I'm pretty sure that for the team doing that, it has taken them for quite a long time to get to that perfection. How long would you think that it would take for a single person in a linear process to do the same? I don't think there's an official answer to that at all, but my guess would be that it would take several minutes. And if I was there, it would take several hours, I'm sure. So this is why it pays off to work together. And this is why we need ecosystems. We can save time, we can save resources, and we can offer the best service available for the customer. What's an ecosystem? Well, there's quite a few definitions for an ecosystem. We are thinking, and one definition is that it's a group of complementary interconnected actors, and each is contributing assets that cannot be easily replaced by some other solution, some other competency, or some other actor. Ecosystems should be run without hierarchy, so there's no one particular stronger leader, but there may be a facilitator and should be a facilitator. They are typically dynamic, so they are not constant in time, but will change and be flexible in terms of the mode of operation and also the targets. They are working seamlessly together, and that way the ecosystem can offer competitive advantage for the whole of the ecosystem, but also for one individual participant. On the whole, everybody should benefit from the work. So an ecosystem will create value, it will create business in synergy, and it could be now or it could be aimed towards the future. And the participants need to share the same motivation, otherwise it's not going to work out. There's also a classification for the ecosystems available. So we could say that ecosystems can be knowledge ecosystems, they could be innovation ecosystems, they could be business ecosystems. At best, the ecosystems will make use of all of these different forms of and targets of operation. So there may be some research, co-creation activities combined to innovation actions and also then business reasons. We just saw that the ecosystems have different purposes. So for knowledge creation, for sharing, then co-innovation, co-development, or for doing business together. We sometimes hear also that there should be a development curve from the knowledge ecosystems through innovation ecosystems all the way through to business ecosystems, but oftentimes this is not the case. So one stakeholder can sometimes participate in multiple different ecosystems in different roles and at different times. They could be built for a particular reason. So there could be a time in space in time where we want to work together on a particular R&D issue or a challenge. But in any case, it's really important that all of the ecosystem participants together come to an understanding on what the scope and the purpose of the collaboration is. If this is unclear, it becomes really difficult to move forward in concrete steps. It's also a good idea to establish rules for the collaboration. So we need to think about funding, confidentiality issues, who the facilitator is, how to communicate, other governance issues. It's also really important to understand which stakeholders we need to solve the challenge. The next phases include formulating agreement on the content and making the ecosystem operational. It's pretty logical going forward, so I'm not going to go into the details. But of course, it's not a linear process in real life, so we may have to take a look at the value exchange and agreements, then move back forward and do some other measures. So it's an iterational process. And if we are talking about business ecosystems, we oftentimes are aiming for something that we cannot complete by ourselves, so that the collaboration brings really additional value. It may be that we want to renew our business. It may be that we want to reach new geographical or application markets. We want to be saving resources, or we may want to complement our competencies with others, and we are not willing to acquire the competencies within house ourselves. But usually we also want to be working together in order to serve our customers better. But what can be said for all ecosystems is that the more complex the challenge we are trying to solve with the ecosystem work, the more likely it is that we will need partners and we will need ecosystemic work. Here we see another approach to ecosystems. So a couple of years ago, we worked on a project together with the ministry, and we were interviewing different kinds of ecosystems in circular economy in Finland. And we came to the conclusion that there are different motivations in the circular ecosystem. So some of the ecosystems seem to be working based on some regional targets and regional growth factors. It may be that the region had some specific side streams that they wanted to utilize together, and it didn't pay off to transport those very far away from that area. Or it may be that they had some particular competencies in the area due to some university or some other educational platforms. And also one of the key factors was that the stakeholders knew each other really well, so the network was already there. Then we also noticed that some of these circular ecosystems were operated by industrially strong partners. So they may have been companies that already had extensive networks and supply chains, and they wanted to renew their business by including startups and SMEs into the work. And then we also saw that there were ecosystems that were based on some circular economy vision, one of which was the textiles ecosystem that we now see operating and have actually set up this facility in Finland as well. So there, some of the challenges included not having a facilitator to the work and so forth, and funding was missing, but now we see that going strong anyways. VTT has been active in plastics for quite a few years, so this is the work of some of my colleagues. I did not construct this beautiful picture by myself, but the basic idea here is that we see that a thick orange line, so that's representing the traditional value chain where we have the production and materials production, and then product manufacturing, use, and then the recycling or the collection of the used materials. What we now want to bring to the picture is the circular design principles, which means that we should maintain the value of the material at its highest all the time, which means that we should use the material as long as we can in the reuse cycle. But just as Jari just said, this is not, we cannot do this forever. So the material wears out, or we need to have some virgin replacement or some other material or product replacement. So we need to move out on these rims. Mechanical recycling, that's already happening to a great extent, but then also bringing into the picture the chemical recycling. We're also envisioning at VTT that some of these technologies could also extend to biological means of processing the materials. And also we are bringing carbon capture and use to the picture. We are thinking these are the solutions for the future. This way we hope to save material and hope to save energy at the end, and of course reduce the amount of material that we need extracted from the virgin resources. This is an initiative that I've been involved in the task force. So some of you may know the Smart and Clean Foundation. It was set up about 2016 in response to the climate change. And we wanted to do some mitigation work through there and set up some impactful initiatives. One of these initiatives is the Kaikki Muovi Kiertää Closed Plastic Circle initiative, and it was set up in 2019. At the time, only 6% of the plastics was actually ending up in reuse. So of course the collection rate was a little bit higher, but this is the percentage that actually got reused back into materials. Of course, with all the tightening regulation and also the targets to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, the foundation decided to set up this initiative and have it at the ambitious goal of raising the recycling rate to 60%. This is how the system looked at that time, and pretty much still looks like this. So on the right-hand side, we have the incoming resources, and then production, consumption, collection, and much is going to energy utilization, just as we learned in the previous presentation. Some of it going through mechanical processing and then back to the production, but a lot of it still leaking out from the cycles. VTT was working on this Yhdessä kestävää kasvua, the ecosystem guide, and it finished with that in 2021, so that's last year. And there, my colleagues came up with this with these steps 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. The first of which is the clear vision, purpose, and value proposal. So these are the steps to take in order to build a successful ecosystem. And now I'm applying that framework, of course, as a hind thought. This wasn't applied when the Smart and Clean Foundation was set up, but I found this useful, and I noticed that a lot of the things that were done at that time were done according to these steps. So the vision and purpose, I just explained about the aim at reducing the greenhouse gas emissions, and as one step and one initiative, the circular plastics. So the Smart and Clean Foundation collected this task force that had complementary competencies and complementary infrastructures, and brought them together to solve this issue and to reach the 60% regional target that was including the metropolitan area, but also the Lahti region. And I think it was beautiful how they actually looked at what the sources of CO2 are in the area, and then noticed that the circular plastics can play a role in reducing the greenhouse gas emissions regionally, and then set up this initiative. So there was already a goal and a target in terms of the impact. As a second action, the task force invited the cities of Helsinki and Espoo, then HSY, which is a regional waste management company owned by the cities, and then VTT, Fortum, Lassila and Tikanoja, and then Siemens representing the data approaches. And this formed the task force. Of course, there were a lot of other stakeholders involved as well. And Smart and Clean was acting as the facilitator. they were actually running the show in a really nice way because they noticed that we need facts and we need figures in order to set up these practical actions in motion. So they took a look and asked for Taival consultancy to create this model for plastic cycles with some numbers. Unfortunately, we weren't able to go deep down into detail enough because we weren't able to include, for example, the different grades of plastics, which is needed to really create a realistic picture of how things are working at the moment. But it was a really good approach on the whole, and that work was continued a little bit later on. Then they also set up workshops to identify the needs and measures. On the right-hand side, you see this pink figure. I don't know if you can see it, it's a really tiny text, but on the outer rim of that picture, we can see some measures or some challenges that were picked out from the workshop. So, for example, recycling, quotas, plastic taxes, then design, etc. And some measures were also taken to the concrete steps regarding these topics. And then also the foundation and the facilitator created reports and did some studies on to be able to share the understanding between the stakeholders in the task force, which is really important. Then on the continuous, Smart and Clean Foundation ended their period as planned after 5 years, and that was last summer. But the work was continued on by one of the task force members, that's the city of Espoo, and we are now in collaboration with them. And I know that we've had discussion, for example, with Borealis in terms of how to continue this work. So we are now concretizing the work through some pilot actions and applying funding for that. Moving into the concrete steps and connecting with the Uusimaa Circular Valley initiative. As for the impact on the value creation, we don't really know yet what's going to come out. So the work is still continuing, but we already have this set of CO2 reduction targets that were set originally. So it's a good start. So learnings from all of this work. Shared understanding, shared purpose, shared vision, really important because we cannot get the concrete action steps going if we don't have this. Then also the topic of local ecosystems. Well, we can discuss whether we need national, whether we need regional, whether we need local. I'm myself leaning towards a little bit in terms of when we're thinking about plastics, that regional is probably the right term. So if we are thinking very local, we probably won't be reaching enough of volume. So the critical volumes are not there. But when we go to regional, and also I know that companies work in a regional mode or even national mode. So sometimes it's not realistic to think only local. However, the collection, of course, needs to be local. And of course, some of the use paths may be local. Then also another learning, not just from this work, but I'm also setting up a circular design innovation ecosystem. So also learnings from there. It's really slow. It's for the patient mind. The first concrete steps need to be built on trust, and it takes time for the participants to get to know each other and understand how the other one works. Practical success cases are needed. Because if we work in the just in the coffee drinking mode for too long, then the enthusiasm goes down, and then we are not able to push forward. So it's really important to have even small practical success cases and make them visible. Ecosystems are a living thing, so they will not stay the same. There are different, the regulations come in, then there are new technologies are born, new entrants into the market are coming. So it's ever changing, and this is why we need to be flexible ourselves. Also, it's only natural that some of the original participants may set up some projects or other activities that are not relevant for all of the participants. This is okay. This is how it should go. So we are happy to see projects going their way, and then but also remembering to bring back the information and knowledge to the broader audiences. Also, Jari was mentioning the chemical recycling. So yes, this is going to shake up the value chains, we think. This is coming, and there may be some other technologies and other players that may change the picture. There were some challenges that I noticed. So when we go to the concrete steps and when we want to move really forward towards the 60%, it's also true that some of the targets at the lower level coming down from the top level of 60%, they diverge. So they are not always aligned between the different stakeholders, and the interests may be diverging. So sometimes it's not possible to collaborate within the original group of stakeholders. Also, regulation, it's sometimes creating funny situations that are not according to the market rules in general. So there may be some artificial drivers in the market, and it's difficult to take those into account. So some strange situations may arise from that. Also, my question is whether the current high price of oil is actually pushing this recycling forward. Maybe it's a good thing, as long in addition that being a bad thing. I know some of you were already thinking that, okay, this is the last time we get to have our coffee, but two more slides if you bear with me. So Jari was talking about the Spirit program, and he mentioned the chemical recycling. Yes, we agree, this is going to change the picture in a big way. Also, we noticed that this week, the Ministry of Environment came out with the Plastics Roadmap for Finland 2.0. This is also mentioning the chemical recycling. It also contains 11 key actions, and the chemical recycling is written into one of those. Our task is now, talking about the chemical recycling, to rebuild the ecosystem to also include the chemical recycling opportunity. On the left-hand side, you see this process scheme. It looks pretty straightforward, right? But in reality, if and when that becomes reality, there will be changes through the value chain. There may be some impacts in how we instruct and carry out the collection and sorting of the material. And from there onwards, there will be changes all the way through to the products. I mean, it's a different product for the mechanically recycled grade. The volumes to energy may be different. Other volumes, value fractions may be different. The picture on the right-hand side shows some of the complexity of the system. So I don't know if it's very tiny text, but if you follow the value chain, it's very long, and there are very many interdependencies marked with those dots. So I guess I'm not going to look into this much deeper, but overall my message is that, and wish is that we should try to keep in mind what we learned from before, from the plastics ecosystems. And also, let's try to make sure that we aim for a holistic and sustainable approach. This is a picture taken in Aleksantterinkatu, downtown Helsinki. It's really close by to the Ministry of Environment. I'm not quite sure that I agree on the method of bringing about the change, but I do agree with the message. Thank you.
You were on mute, sorry. Initially, there was some session going on. I think I can give the floor to Jaakko on how to proceed now.
Yes, thank you. Great. So thank you, Kasper. So I'm going to give a quick sort of 10 or so minute reflections on Inka's talk on the topic of plastics recycling, ecosystems for plastics recycling. And the idea here is just to bring some insights or kind of loose reflections on the topic based on the research that we have done in the project. So my name is Jaakko Siltalappi. By the way, I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Aalto University Department of Industrial Engineering and Management. And so this kind of research that we have been doing largely together with VTT is sort of the basis here. To get us going, one of the key sort of perspectives and starting points that we had when we initiated the project was that we need to adopt this system level view on the plastics value chain. If we want to understand the mechanisms, the drivers, the barriers of this transition towards sustainable raw materials, towards circular economy, we can't just focus narrowly on one specific tier of the value chain. We have to look at this as a systemic whole. And as has been already described, both I think by Jari and by Inka as well, there are some big sort of systemic challenges that we are facing. First of all, obviously, we are fixed to the use of fossil raw materials largely in the production of plastics. And more broadly, the model of the plastics economy is very much linear as well. And when we factor in the issues of plastic waste leaking into the environment, the fact that at least the current forecast show that the demand for plastics is will continue to grow rapidly in the following years and decades. I mean, we need to find effective systemic solutions. And one of the ways in which we have done this in the project is to try and think about future avenues for a system level transition. And essentially, we have identified and focused our efforts around three avenues that seem fairly promising. And also, I think these three elements were fairly present in Jari's presentation as well. So one of the things that we need to find ways to do is to shift from the use of fossil raw materials to the use of renewable bio-based raw materials in the production of plastics. And that requires obviously a lot of changes in the supply chains, raw material supply chains, in the strategies of the big oil and petrochemical companies who are in the central role in this value chain. Another one is obviously material circulation. I will come back to this in a bit more detail next. And then finally, as already described, we need to find ways to reduce consumption through the development of alternative materials, new business concepts, operational models around repair and reuse, changes in consumer behavior, and so on and so forth. So to look at the case of increasing material circulation, I think we are in a kind of an interesting position today where we are seeing a lot of kind of early initiatives, actions, both driven by regulation, as well as driven by different companies, different types of consortiums and emerging ecosystems to start to increase the recycling of plastic waste. But in order for this development to really start to gain traction, I think there are at least two sort of crucial things that we need to focus on. The first being obviously the establishment and creation of waste collection infrastructure for collecting plastic waste separately, for recycling it using different techniques. And the second point is that, I mean, the quality of especially mechanically recycled plastics is a big issue. And even if we can collect more and more material, if we don't have the appropriate technologies to recycle it, to process it back into a high quality raw material, the system as a whole cannot really function. So we need to find ways to develop new technologies, integrate them into the recycling infrastructure in a way that allows us to actually also use recycled plastics more and more. And so hopefully what this does in the long run is that it brings more kind of, it integrates first of all circularity recycling into practices both among consumers and in different industries, and leads to a case where recycled plastics are used in large quantities to replace virgin plastics in different types of applications. Now, obviously, as Inka already mentioned, this requires the contribution of a whole host of different actors. And I think this is where the ecosystems become really central and relevant. How can we bring different types of actors together in driving transitions towards circular economy? And so, inspired by Inka's presentations, we had discussions earlier this week about the seminar and the presentation. And so I thought I would give a couple of examples or thoughts around these different types of ecosystems and what kind of opportunities maybe they offer to improving circulation. So first with the regional recycling ecosystems, I think the example that Inka provided around the Smart and Clean Foundation and this Kaikki Muovi Kiertää initiative is a good example where kind of regional actors can come together to really try and make a difference in terms of plastics recycling, plastic circulation, where I think in the example we saw that there is the involvement from regional authorities, from waste management companies, recyclers, and maybe even broadly potential for converters, maybe local brand owners to engage in these ecosystems, not just to kind of in a way create new solutions for circularity, but also increase the kind of or create new business out of these ecosystems and around these ecosystems. Second, these ecosystems around industry leaders are, I think, really promising. What Jari was describing again had a lot of interesting ideas in this regard. That's that the big companies who are producing plastics have the opportunity to develop new types of business ecosystems or extend their existing business ecosystems in ways, for instance, through new partnerships, new collaborations, through building new value chains, to enable them to utilize circular raw materials, bio-based raw materials, and so on. And I think in the case of many oil companies, petrochemical companies, we are seeing the emergence of partnerships, for instance, with chemical recycling technology developers to start setting up and developing this technology from in a way, the lab scale to pilot scale and already maybe into commercial scale. And then finally, we also need a lot of new knowledge around this kind of complex issue and the different solutions and different kind of knowledge ecosystems will be crucially important. Here, different types of collaborative research projects, industry knowledge clusters can provide hubs for companies to come together and really kind of work to solve these challenges through means of joint knowledge creation, through joint, for instance, business model development and such. So a few reflections to conclude this with. I think one of the real kind of important points is that we can't sort of expect to create one ecosystem to solve all problems. We have to kind of, from a broader systemic perspective, we have to, in a way, look to different types of ecosystems and how they can be complementary, synergistic in terms of tackling the challenges that we have with plastics recycling. And this kind of brings into view kind of the linkages between different types of initiatives, from company-led initiatives to regional recycling initiatives to maybe some kinds of different kinds of national programs and so on. And one of the kind of interesting questions is that with plastics recycling, we have talked, I guess, mainly about packaging, but obviously plastic waste is being generated in the context of the textile industry, construction, electronics, automotive, so on and so on. And how can we create sort of ecosystems or linkages between ecosystems to enable the recycling of plastic waste more broadly as well? I mean, packaging is probably the biggest sector to use plastic out of all of these different industries, but nonetheless, plastic waste kind of goes in the big picture far beyond packaging. Kind of related to the first point, when we talk about ecosystems at different levels, it's important to link local or regional actions to national and international developments. And I think in terms of the points that Inka made about setting visions and objectives for ecosystems and how important that is at the beginning, I think this resonates quite neatly with the idea that in this sort of vision setting and goal formation, we have to find ways to align these ecosystem specific objectives with broader developments, find ways of how to position that ecosystem within broader developments, how to coordinate actions, for instance, in terms of kind of technological developments, market related factors, regulatory changes, and so on. And the question, for instance, that I think Inka raised quite nicely there related to the effects of regulation on ecosystem formation is an interesting one. For instance, I think in the context of chemical recycling, there are some open regulatory questions right now in terms of does it count as recycling or not? And these types of issues can really sort of play a part in enabling or inhibiting the formation of new circular ecosystems. And then finally, if we look to kind of specific ecosystems and their internal dynamics, kind of the key point and idea with ecosystems is that different types of actors with complementary resources come together to create a new type of system level solution or output. And to do this, it is obviously necessary for the ecosystems to have incentives for different types of actors to actually come together and contribute their resources towards the collective objective. And this is kind of a challenging task, I guess, in many ways. For instance, as ecosystems evolve over time, the incentives or needed might change. It might be in more kind of knowledge-based ecosystems. How do you motivate and engage actors contra kind of the more lead firm driven business ecosystems? A lot of interesting questions there. And I think with plastics recycling, coming back to the point about regulation, it seems to me, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to me that the developments so far have been largely been driven by regulatory actions. And there have been a lot of questions, or at least certain questions related to where is the market pull for the development and the sort of growth of different types of initiatives or ecosystems. And in this context, if we think about the sort of the economic incentives, that can create kind of a question or even a dilemma that if the markets are essentially not necessarily driving ecosystem formation, or at least if there are sort of missing market incentives for the formation of ecosystems, then where can we find ways to also kind of, in a way, find ways to create new economic value and share that among the ecosystem actors. But that's all from me. If Katri Valkokari has anything to add to this reflection, this is a kind of a joint discussion that this presentation comes out of. So, yeah.
Thanks, Jaakko. Yes, we had several discussions with Inka, and the idea was that we have an interaction with her in the end, but yeah, the situation how it is. Maybe one more thing that I would like to highlight, and it was also already covered by Inka, is that if we go to the roots of the concept of the ecosystem, we should think also and give freedom to self-organizing, so that there happens things that not everybody in the ecosystem need to be involved in everything. So there need to be, and there has to be small there should be kind of small networks inside the network that are going through some issues and doing things together, but there need to be rules already at the beginning agreed how these smaller networks, these subsystems within the ecosystem also kind of how the benefits of that work is shared among all ecosystem actors. Maybe that is the final point that I want to highlight here and give you as a lesson of learning related to ecosystem.
Let's all give a big hand to Katri and Jaakko. And of course, Inka, thank you also for your contribution. That marks the end of this first session of this morning. We go, those who are here, we go upstairs to the lobby. There is 9 cases of research in the ValueBioMat project where you can go visit the researchers and talk to them. They have some posters up there, some examples, a video I've seen. So that will be very nice. So please go there, take your coffee and go talk to these researchers. For those that have joined us online, you can go to valuebiomat.fi/research. And there you will find the same cases that are here in the lobby presented for you online. So when you have your coffee at home or at your office, you can then also read about those projects. Then I think we reconvene here at 11:15 for the second session of this morning. And do I have anything else to say? No, that was it. Very good. Then please enjoy our research examples.
So now it's 11:15 according to the clock there. So let's continue for the second and last part of this seminar. I hope you all enjoyed the exhibition and maybe also some coffee and some chocolate, and you're full of energies to challenge our next speaker, Elizabeth Kirk, with challenging questions. My name is Rosa Ballardini, and I'm a professor of intellectual property law at the University of Lapland. So in ValueBioMat, me and our team, my team, we take care of the law and policy issues related to these plastics transitions, sustainability transitions in plastics. And that's actually the focus also of this last part of the seminar. So we have invited a speaker from the United Kingdom. Her name is Elizabeth Kirk. And she is going to present us some fresh and currently ongoing debates related to regulation and policy and legislation in relation to plastics. So I'm very happy to introduce you, Elizabeth, and I'm very happy that you had the time to join us here in this seminar today. Unfortunately, not physically, but I hope next time you will be able to travel to Finland. Elizabeth is a professor at the University of Lincoln, and especially she is the global chair of global governance and ecological justice, as well as the director of the Lincoln Center for Ecological Justice. At the moment, her field of expertise is very broad and expands on several areas of law, especially related to environmental issues. She has been written extensively in the field of complexity and normativity in the context of areas such as plastic pollution and energy efficiency. So areas where there are very complex and highly multifaceted problems. She is very well known in the circle, and I'm very happy that she is able to share with us today some insights related to this very fresh and new and actually highly, maybe even controversial, debated issue related to a new global treaty on plastic pollution. So I'll say no more, and I give the floor directly to you, Elizabeth, and you have about 20 minutes, and after that, there will be some reflections from our side, and hopefully also some questions from my side, and maybe also from the audience to you.
Great, thank you very much, Rosa, for the very kind introduction, and thank you for the invitation to participate in the event today. I am sorry that I couldn't be with you in person to enjoy the informal discussions as well as the formal discussions, which I've certainly enjoyed listening to so far, and also missing out on Finnish coffee as well, which is quite legendary, I think. As Rosa said, I want to talk to you today about developments at the international level in terms of regulation of plastics. As you may know, in February of this year, the UN Environment Assembly passed a resolution to start the clock on negotiations for an international treaty to end plastics. I'd like to say a little bit about the background, about how we got to this point before talking a little bit more about what the resolution calls for. In essence, it sets out some objectives for matters that should be included within the convention. And it also sets a very short time frame for negotiation of that convention. As I said, it was passed in February of this year, and the objective is to have the convention negotiated by the end of 2024, so in less than 2 years' time. 3 or 4 years ago, if you partook in conversations about whether there ought to be a treaty on plastics, the general consensus was that there was no need for a treaty, that we had sufficient international laws to be able to deal with any pollution issues, and they could be amended and have additions made to them, and that would be sufficient. There was also the general view that it wasn't such a serious problem, that it'd be better to spend any political and social capital on negotiating amendments to, for example, the Climate Change Convention and Paris Agreement and so on. And that really it wasn't so significant. And yet now we're at the position where we've had this clock started on negotiations, and it's negotiations of what is set to be, or certainly the task that's been set to the negotiating committee is to negotiate a very ambitious convention, because it is, the resolution calls for a treaty to end plastic pollution. And the objective for the resolution is that we have a treaty that is designed to prevent, reduce and eliminate plastics pollution. I'll come back to that in a moment, that point, and how that compares to other international conventions that address pollution. But in short, for now, I will say that this idea of eliminating plastics pollution and the way it's being addressed within the resolution and hopefully within the future treaty is really quite innovative and, as I said, ambitious. So how did we get to this point? You know, as I said, a few years ago, the very idea of a plastics treaty would not have gained much consensus. But in those last few years, our understandings of the risks that plastics pollution presents to the environment and to ourselves, to humans, has grown exponentially. We've known that plastics, if not handled properly, could cause pollution for decades. We've known that since the 1970s, if not before. But what's become apparent recently is the scale of that, of the amount of pollution and of the threat that it poses. We've all seen the pictures of seagulls that have consumed plastics and then starved to death because their stomachs were filled with plastics. We've seen the pictures of whales, for example, being trapped in ghost fishing nets. But what we're now realizing, and research is demonstrating, that as individuals, as humans, we are consuming plastics in the food that we eat. It's been found in honey, in fish like sardines and anchovies that we consume. It's been found in beer, in salt, in drinking water. It's in the air that we breathe. We've now got evidence that there's plastics in our bodies, in our bloodstreams. It's been found in the bloodstreams of fetuses. And there's also, sorry, I just paused because I noticed that there's a comment there, but I don't think it's to me. Yeah, it's been found also, there's research showing that plastics can interfere with the functioning of human cells as well. So we know that all of these risks, but in addition, we're seeing that plastics don't just have an impact on the individual, whether it's individual animal, fish, bird, person, but they also have an impact on our ecosystems and potentially on our future food security. Obviously there's been a lot of attention paid to plastics in the oceans, but we also know that plastics contamination occurs on land, including on agricultural land, and that plastic there can interfere with soil structure and so interfere with the way that water and nutrients flow through the soil, and in effect reduce the fecundity of the soil and its ability to produce crops for the future. I'm quite conscious of time. I could talk also about the impacts on the food security from and the ecosystems within the marine environment, but I won't. Suffice to say that in effect, plastics threaten both the ecosystems on land, ecosystems in the marine environment, and our own food security in terms of the food sources that we draw from the marine environment and from land. We've also reached a point then where scientific evidence has grown substantially, public understanding of the problem has grown substantially, and public demands for change have grown substantially, and industry has started to take the lead and to adopt voluntary agreements to reduce packaging, for example, taking measures to change single-use plastics to other materials or to reduce the use of single-use plastics and so on. And we've seen across the world countries taking advantage of this policy window, this opportunity where the science and the politics and the public opinion converge to the point that it makes it possible to pass legislation and to not really face terribly much by way of objection to it, and so to pass legislation that's likely to be effective. So what we've seen then is various countries in the EU adopting measures to ban or reduce the use of certain single-use plastics or packaging. Problem for industry then is that if you are a manufacturer that exports to a number of countries, you have then different standards to meet. So you've got a choice about whether you adopt perhaps the strictest standard, because then that should mean that your products are comply with the standards in all countries, or whether you decide to forgo certain markets. But the other problem just now is because this is a rapidly developing area, and laws are developing across countries all the time, it's very difficult for industry necessarily to keep up with some of those standards. So again, there is a benefit to having a resolution and ultimately a treaty that regulates plastics at the global level. So this background explains how we've got to this point that it's been possible to adopt a resolution to start the process to negotiate a treaty, and how it's been possible to adopt such an ambitious resolution and hopefully then such an ambitious treaty as well. So let me say a little bit more then about what the resolution calls for in the treaty and what that might mean in practice. Now, I mentioned already that the resolution calls for the treaty to focus on prevention, reduction and elimination of plastics pollution, and operative paragraph 3E asks or suggests that there should be a measure to ask states to set national action plans for this. As I mentioned already, other treaties that deal with the control of pollution tend to have measures to prevent, reduce and control pollution. In other words, they acknowledge that we will continue to have this form of pollution in future. Even, I suppose that the strictest treaties that we might look at would be treaties such as the Ozone Convention with the Montreal Protocol, which phases out or is designed to phase out and has been successful in phasing out the manufacture and use of certain ozone depleting chemicals. Also, the Persistent Organic Pollutants Convention takes a similar approach to the Montreal Protocol, but even they don't refer to the elimination of plastics pollution. And within this resolution, it refers to this general objection of preventing, reducing and ultimately eliminating plastics pollution. And it has a further provision, which I'll come back to, hopefully I'll have enough time to do that, which talks about removing existing plastics. And that's an innovative measure, and I do want to come back to that shortly. But for now then, how are our states to achieve this prevention, reduction and elimination? Well, what the resolution refers to then is the need to adopt measures to ensure that the full life cycle of plastics and goods made of plastics are regulated. So operative paragraph 3B says that measures should address product design as well as waste management. And I think this is an interesting provision because it's unusual in combining the start of the life of the product design, with the mention of waste management. So the idea is that in essence, these two aspects have to work in tandem. But it's not just about designing products to make waste management easier. If you look further into the resolution, what it calls for is that we have regulation, a treaty, and then ultimately national regulations that ensure that products are designed for repair, reuse, remanufacture, and then finally recycling. Ideally, we will be looking for a treaty and national regulations then that also deal with issues like fugitive emissions, such as microplastic fibers from clothing, to make sure that those fugitive emissions are prevented or reduced as much as possible. So we might think, well, what would this look like to have a treaty or regulations that deal with the design of products, to deal with the design of plastic products? Well, we already have examples. So within the EU, for example, you have the EU Sustainable Products Policy, which introduces a life cycle approach to the design or the management of products. And that policy has led to the adoption of the Eco-Design of Energy Using Products Directive, which has been followed by the Eco-Design Directive. Both of these take a life cycle approach to the design of products. And in essence, they're designed to ensure that materials stay within the economic system rather than reaching a point in which they're perceived of as waste to be disposed of. So they introduce the idea of the circular economy, and that's the idea that's being reiterated within the plastics resolution and ultimately, we hope, within the plastics treaty. I think it's worth pausing to think about actually plastics and the volume of plastics that we have within the world. Since plastics were first manufactured, I think about 9 billion tons of plastics have been produced, and about 7 billion tons of those plastics have been waste. That's a significant amount of material to be lost from our economies. And I think, again, we're at a point in time where the significance of losing materials for our economy starts to become quite significant. You know, we've talked about plastics in terms of harm, and that's generally the way it's discussed. But I think we've seen also, particularly in the last few years, how vulnerable some of our supply chains are to shocks, whether that's from the pandemic, whether it's as a result of extreme weather events caused by climate change, or whether it's caused by the war in Ukraine. So this idea of moving to a circular economy where we have materials staying within the economy rather than being lost to it might help us to weather some of those shocks. Of course, there will be some things that we need to think about as industries or as countries, as well as in negotiating the global treaty, in that we might want to question where the circular economy should be located. Should it be within, should we be thinking about developing our economy within the individual state to make sure that recycling, for example, takes place within that state, or are we talking about a global circular economy? Coming back then to the question of design and how design might operate within this. Again, if you look at the eco-design directives, basically they each design a technical system to establish a set of minimum design specifications. And so we might see something similar happening within the treaty. I would imagine if that happens, then what we'll have is a basic treaty text with additional protocols or annexes to deal with the issues of design and how those might be amended and updated across time. Of course, one of the things that we'll have to think about is how we deal with, or whether we should deal with different types of products in different ways. It may not be possible to repair all products, for example. Single-use items, obviously, they're not designed to be repaired. So we might, I presume that this treaty is going to move very much towards the end of single-use items unless they can be completely recycled. So we might be looking then at which items can be repaired. I mean, we already know things like computers and phones that are made with plastics should be repairable, but what else can be repaired realistically? What else can be remanufactured or reused in different ways? What do we do with products such as medical syringes, for example, or other medical products made from plastics, can we ensure that they can be effectively recycled? I think at the moment the way they're dealt with is through incineration, but is there another way to deal with them so that they can be safely recycled to produce plastics that can be reused? I think there's lots of questions that need to be asked here. And this is one of the places where having industry input would be really useful. So, you know, we've heard earlier about the difficulties of recycling plastic film, particularly when a sticker is added to it or something else. So we do need to be able to have input from industry at appropriate points into what's technically feasible now, what can be feasible in future, and what needs to be considered within the design of different types of products. The other thing that we need to consider when thinking about the life cycle approach is also consumer behaviour. However products are designed, whether they're designed as single use or to be repairable and replaceable, ultimately, we find that consumers don't always behave the way we anticipate. So while there are very successful, for example, bottle return schemes in some countries, we do have to consider how these schemes might work. We've heard about the challenges this morning in Finland, where you've got rural areas. We have similar challenges in other countries, small island states. One of their challenges is they simply don't have the space to have the facility to recycle in the same way, to recycle fully. So there's a question then about how we collect materials from individuals to be recycled, how we ensure that we encourage recycling across all countries, and how we ensure that the way we design products actually fits with the way consumers will behave. And again, there's an opportunity here, I think, for industry to input into these discussions about what's feasible, what works and what may not work. In addition to design at the start of life, states are being asked to, within the treaty, or to adopt measures within the treaty to ensure then the adoption of environmentally sound waste management approaches. Again, we've heard a little bit about the problems with waste management approaches, and we see at present across all countries we have different standards applying in terms of what's recyclable and how it's collected. Within countries we have different standards applying. Even within the UK, within a particular city, you might see different standards applying in different parts of that city. So it makes it very difficult for an effective and robust waste management industry to work in terms of recycling. So what we would certainly hope for within the treaty is that we have these regulations to encourage standardization across waste management that helps to secure the sustainability of the recycling market, the repair market for goods, and the remanufacturing market for goods. And so we certainly need some insights from industry into what works, whether it is best to be collecting materials to still trade them across different countries, to take them to the place where they can best be repaired, remanufactured or recycled, whether we should be encouraging this to happen at the local level to reduce transport, how much should we, what technology should we be sharing, and what standards should we be setting? So there's a lot of questions around here, and certainly a lot where we would hope industry would be involved. The next element that I want to mention is the point that I talked about earlier, that operative paragraph 3C asks that within the treaty we have measures to ensure cooperation to remove existing plastic from oceans. Now it is interesting that it only mentions oceans and not removal of existing plastic from land or from fresh water. Presumably this is because of two reasons. First of all, we have been aware that of the volume of plastics within the oceans and the way they can be transported thousands of kilometers from one country to another. But also because the oceans contain common spaces that are jointly owned and managed, if you like, by all states. It's not clear, though, what those cooperative measures should be or what those cooperative mechanisms ought to be. It could be that we have a treaty that prioritises action at the regional level. So you have the HELCOM Commission, which operates in the Baltic Sea, or the OSPAR, which is designed to address marine pollution and environmental protection in the North East Atlantic. It might be that we ask them to ensure, these regional organisations to ensure the cleanup, or it might be that we have a global mechanism. Either way, it's highly unlikely that this mechanism would lead to an international body that's going to be carrying out the cleanup activities. And what's far more likely is that we have partnership with private organisations, whether those are NGOs or industry organisations. But there are questions still to be answered. So how would the cleanup be funded? Would we create a fund, an international fund? And if so, where would the costs or the monies come from for that? Or would we leave it to the actors who are partnered with for them to finance the cleanup of oceans? How then do we prioritise where that cleanup takes place? Again, would it be left to the individual actors to decide where they work? And then what questions of equity would arise? Would that mean, for example, that plastics are cleaned up in the oceans of the global north, but not in the global south because there's more industry capability in the global north, for example, or vice versa? How would the benefits be shared? Because in essence, we are going to be producing or gathering a material for reuse. So how would we share the benefits of that? So there are, again, lots of questions. And again, I think lots of opportunities for industry to input into how these mechanisms should be designed, what might work, and where funding, for example, might come from. So I've mentioned several times, there's lots of opportunities for industry to be involved. And one of the final points I wanted to mention with regards to the resolution is that it does call for states to take or to work with partners from industry, all sectors of society, from industry to indigenous peoples, to gather inputs in terms of what works in terms of waste management or design of products, and what ought to be within the treaty. So some concluding comments. I think, as I said, this is a very exciting and very ambitious treaty. I think it is needed. I think it will bring a huge number of benefits for industry as well as for society in general. There are significant opportunities here in terms of thinking about how we design and taking the lead in how we design products and taking the lead in how we design waste management mechanisms or update waste management mechanisms and systems as well. It is, as I said, something I think we desperately need to address very promptly, because if we don't, then we are going to have some serious environmental problems. But I think also it's beneficial, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of closing or creating a circular economy to keep resources within the economy rather than simply losing them. I think that's going to be beneficial for the future. So thank you very much for listening to me. I look forward to the discussion and to questions to follow. Thank you.
Now, okay, thank you very much, Elizabeth. We applaud to you, but maybe I don't know if you heard us, but thanks for the very clear and I would say even positive presentation. What I will do now, I will abuse a little bit of my position as a chair and give maybe some feedback to your presentation, maybe some maybe provocative questions back to you, if that's okay. But then I would also like to engage a little bit with the audience. I know that there might be some questions from the audience. So if it's okay with you, I will start and then I will give the floor to any of you who have some questions or questions related to this interesting proposal. So you touched upon several topics, and actually, I would say such a large amount of topics that this treaty aims. You seem very positive, and I'm happy to see that you're positive. I'm perhaps less positive. Maybe I've spent too much time in Finland, so I attracted, or in Lapland, attracted a little bit of negativity. What I'm trying to say is that I do agree that this treaty or this resolution has maybe a high ambitious. At the same time, at least when we started in ValueBioMat, it was very clear since from the start from us that a transition, a sustainability transition in plastics is needed. What is not clear and what is still not clear is how to get there. So it seems to me that this treaty is rather, again, staying at the level of setting an ambition, but without giving really concrete ideas on how to get there. What kind of measure do we have to get there? So if I look, for instance, at also thanks for the paper that you sent to me, and as well as what you said in your presentation. We are trying to look at how to transform the whole plastic value chain from like a design stage to recycling all the way, but on a very kind of maybe general or theoretical level. And if I look at all these measures and I compare to what has been done or what is already ongoing in the European Union, my question is, does this treaty really add to the measures that we have already in place? Think about the Green Deal, think about the like circular economy package, think about the plastic package. We already have in there set a lot of these measures. I would say probably all of the measures that this treaty wants to include at a very general level, but yet we don't really have an answer to how to get there. So maybe my first question to you, is there really an added value from a European perspective of this treaty? If instead the purpose of this treaty is to then harmonize this already existing standard in Europe at a global level, then my question is, are we then trying again to take our European or Western or industrialized or rich country standards and try to transpose them at the global level? And if so, what kind of measures does this treaty have, or what kind of measures does this treaty include to ensure that we are not again kind of reaching green colonialism and transplant our global norm measures into global south perspectives, without considering that issues related to sustainability are not exactly the same in all parts of the world. So that's maybe my first question to you.
Well, thank you. Two very interesting questions. The first thing I'd say is that we don't yet have a treaty, and we don't yet have even a text of the treaty. All we've got at the moment is the resolution calling for the negotiation of the treaty. And so I think the points that you raise are very important ones to be considering as we negotiate the treaty. I'm going to tell the second one first, if you don't mind, because you've asked, are we, in essence, are we just going to see green colonialism? I don't think we will, and the reason for that is twofold. First, the states that have driven the adoption of this resolution have come largely from the global south. So in particular, the small island states from the Pacific have played a major role in getting this treaty negotiated, or sorry, getting this resolution passed. And I think they will continue to play a major role in the negotiations of the treaty. Secondly, when you look at actually the measures that have been adopted across the world in terms of single-use plastics, you actually see that countries in Africa have taken the lead, not the EU or other countries. And so we are, in a sense, catching up. We might be doing better in terms of design of certain products, for example, but I think it's not the case that we can look at one particular part of the world and say, in terms of plastics, this part of the world is more advanced in terms of its regulation than elsewhere. What will it do for the EU? Well, it's very difficult to predict because I don't know exactly what's going to be in the treaty. But if it is as ambitious as the resolution calls for, then I think it will push even countries in the EU to think further about precisely what design there is. I would certainly hope that we're going to see measures that are in some ways similar to those found within the Montreal Protocol. So in the Montreal Protocol, you have specific chemicals being banned or phased out over time. And I would like to think that we're going to see something very similar here, but of course much more focused on design, so that we will have global commitments to ensuring, perhaps agreeing that certain single-use plastics just shouldn't be used, but also agreeing very strict standards, also in terms of design of the plastic itself, design for recyclability. So I think there is a potential to push standards across the world and to ensure the adoption of different types of standards from those that we already see. And I agree at the moment it is at a very high level, but that's because we're really right at the start of the process of negotiating the treaty.
Great, thank you for the answer. I have one more maybe feed comment, and then I promise that I give the floor because I see that we are already maybe almost running out of time. My second comment, so I think it came up also already from the presentations from the previous speakers, and it also came out from you, which is quite interesting. The fact that to get there, we need a systemic change. So it came up from, I think, partly the first presenter, it came out clearly from the second, and you also mentioned in your presentation. So you mentioned, for instance, several actors, NGOs, industries, policymakers, you mentioned indigenous people. So all these actors are needed in order for us to transit towards a better, more sustainable plastic ecosystem, or in general towards a more sustainable future. At the same time, clearly the question there is how to balance the interests of all these actors, which you know, it's very nice to have on the back of our mind the willingness and the interest and the ideal that we should all cooperate to get there, but we also know that reality very often is a little bit different than this one. And in this context, there is the perspective of the industry on the one side, or maybe not the industry, but perhaps the perspective of the producers and distributors on the one side. And perhaps I will not go there because to some extent it has been discussed. On the other, there is the perspective of the end users and the consumers, which has also been touched upon. And this consumer's perspective that you also mentioned is essential to make the transition happen. It came up from the comments also from the previous presenters. Without the correct or proper consumer behavior towards, you know, more sustainable practices, it's very difficult to enhance any transition. Now, in our project, what we did, we studied a little bit the mechanisms that are currently used in legislation to drive consumer behavior. And what we found is that although it is pretty clear from statistics also that there is an increased awareness, but also increased willingness of consumers to act more responsibly. The current like legal mechanisms that are very much used to drive consumer behavior are perhaps not so transparent, or perhaps not even so, not necessarily always so much driving consumers towards sustainable practices. For example, we look at certifications and different type of certification mechanisms. And we found out that although some of these certifications are very well backed up by strong life cycle assessments, these certifications are mostly those that are mandatory certificates. While if you look at voluntary certifications that are used basically in most products, the large majority of those in the plastic sectors are used in the plastic sector are not so well transparent. So the question is, if I as a consumer rely on this mechanism because I want to be a responsible consumer, I want to behave in a responsible and sustainable way, but at the same time these mechanisms are not really truth in terms of sustainability, then are we really fostering a transition through the legal mechanisms that we have at the moment? So the question here is, do you envision that in this coming treaty, this issue will be somehow tackled? And if so, in what ways?
I would hope that the issue is tackled. So taking the question of consumers, I think it's too difficult to leave this to consumer choice for the reasons that you've outlined, but and some additional reasons as well. Sometimes when it comes to plastics, it's simply not possible for people to go and buy, for example, their weekly groceries without buying those groceries wrapped in plastics. You know, so it depends on what's available in terms of places to shop. It depends on the economic purchasing power of the consumers. And we're thinking about that from our perspective, but if you go to some countries in the global south, they may not have refrigeration available at present. So the only way to have fresh and safe food is to use plastic packaging. So I think while consumers have a role to play, I don't think we should be leaving the choices to them or to leaving it to consumers simply to make those choices. I think we do need to have much stronger regulation which sets the standards for packaging or for products in terms of what plastics they can be made of, whether they can be made of plastics, and how repairable, recyclable, and so on those plastics should be. In terms of balancing the interests of all the other point that you made, I know in the short term it might seem that there are conflicting interests, but I think if we take the long view, the interests of all these different actors coincide. We want to see, in essence, sustainable futures. We want to be able to, if we're industry, we want to be able to continue to make and sell products. If we are Indigenous peoples, we want to be able to continue our way of life. And I think that is where this treaty can actually help balance those interests out by if we take this ambitious call and put it into effect in an equally ambitious treaty that really does have the detail or the mechanisms created to allow the detail to be developed in terms of how we regulate design. If we take that, then I think actually we can balance out the interests of all. Of course, there will be individual companies that will have to change the way they are making products or may have to even change the products that they're making. But I think here, one of the issues that we need to think about is how we signal that change is coming. And again, I don't like to keep using the example of the Montreal Protocol, but it did do this quite effectively. It said, you know, this is what is coming. We are going to phase out these types of chemicals. So if we have a treaty that says to industry, in effect, this is what is coming, we are going to move to regulate these different types of activities and give industry enough warning, then we can move towards saving and securing a sustainable future for industry, for individuals, for Indigenous groups as well. And that way we secure our common interests as well. I hope that answers your questions.
Very nice. I think that's a very nice message to take home. So let's all balance our interest towards you know, a sustainable future. And I see that there is now no, okay, but we are really running out of time. But if there is like one burning question, I think we can take it from the audience. So I now perhaps ask anyone who wants to ask a question to raise the hand. So Elizabeth, there is one question from the audience.
Hello, thank you, Elizabeth, for your nice presentation, an interesting one actually. So we are studying the transition of like this plastic packaging to this like bio-based packaging within our project. So the one interesting thing is that like within our like 4 years of research, so from 2019 we saw some like updates, some like progress in like internally in Finland. So like when we started, based on a report, we saw that like some EPS boxes were not actually recyclable, and now like one company here is currently progressing really well, and they're recycling this like EPS polystyrene boxes. So my question regarding your discussion about the global approach and the globalization is, so what's the role of like what's going on in China actually? So as one of the leading manufacturer in the area of like the plastic, so what's their approach in this like recycling? I haven't read anything about, so since you discussed, have you read anything? Have you have any sources regarding that info about what are their approaches? Thank you.
So what's going on in China? I'm not really, I can't say that I'm an expert in what's happening within China. Certainly one of the approaches that they've focused on has been the reduction in production of plastics. And I'm just, I have a document in front of me which I'm just trying to scan to see if it mentions recycling as well. Yeah, I couldn't really answer that question with any certainty. I think they are adopting laws, but to deal with recycling to try and improve it, but I'm sorry, I can't really give you any detailed answers. I do have a colleague I could put you in touch with if that would be helpful. So I don't know what's the easiest. The easiest way might be to email me afterwards. I can give you my email address, and that's e.kirk@lincoln.ac.uk. Or you can find me on the web if you search for my name in the University of Lincoln. And if you email me, then I could put you in contact with a colleague in China who would be able to answer more of your questions, if that'd be helpful.
Great. So it's now time to conclude this nice seminar. So I thank you, Elizabeth, for the presentation and for the feedback on the answers, on the questions. I now give the floor back to our leader, Professor Jukka Seppälä, for some concluding remarks.
Thank you. Thank you, Rosa, for conducting this last session. It's been a great day. It's been so exciting to see different visions to a topic that we agree very much what is the direction. Of course, what we could debate and what we could work out are all the detailed measures to be done. But that's why we have this forum. That's why we have this ValueBioMat. I think the willingness is there by consumers, by producers in the industry and in the whole society. I'm amazed how topical our ValueBioMat is. We planned this some years ago, and it's surprisingly more and more acute. We face the transitions, as said already in the beginning of today. Big thanks to the external speakers, Jari, Lehtinen, Inka Orko, and Elizabeth Kirk. Inspiring talks, inspiring discussions with you. And very much thanks to the audience here in the auditorium, but also thanks for those who followed and listened and took part in this in distance by the connection through the computer connection. Let's close the morning session right now.